Good morning, everyone. This is Seth Itzkan with Soil for Climate, and I'm here with my colleague and mentor, the great Allan Savory, the inventor of holistic management and holistic planned grazing, and it's a great honor for me to be here at his home in Florida. And his wife and colleague Jody Butterfield is also here with us, and we're really looking forward to today's interview, where we'll be discussing the role of holistic management in helping to reverse global warming. And first, I just want to get some logistics. We want to, before we actually dig into it, we want to sort of, it has to go live and we have to share it. So I'm asking if people are seeing this now in real time, that they share it in various other places. The questions, we will take questions through the comment window associated with this video. And so if you post your questions here, then the various moderators who will be reading your questions and will be fielding them. About at least half of this interview will be dedicated to answering questions that come through the Facebook feed. A quick question, Jody, do you see it? You have seen it and you are able to share it at this point to the various other groups? Okay, then, so let's get started. So I'm here with Allan Savory. Allan, it's a pleasure as always. So basically, we're just going to talk a little bit about soil and climate, but a large part of this is really going to be based on holistic management, or sort of the holistic framework, or really a different type of management to address these questions of complexity. So there's the science, of course, of climate and drawdown, and we're eyeball deep in that. But there really is a larger issue, which is about complexity itself, and how do we manage in this era of all of these issues: food, climate, land management, human migration, politics, all of that. And ultimately, that's the contribution, if you will, that holistic management can be most valuable for. It isn't just about grazing and soil. It's really much more than that. And we want to allow Allan the time to have that broader conversation. So Allan, why don't we just turn the camera over to you and tell our loving audience,
Hi, everyone.
what is holistic management, and what is its role, in your opinion, in terms of addressing the climate crisis?
Well, you began to say it there. We've got a climate crisis, but we've also got a global desertification one, and we've also got many things going on in the world, and you can try to solve these one by one. For example, it's very essential that we stop the rapid burning of fossil fuels, and everybody that's sane knows that today, all right? But if you stop that, you are not going to address climate change, because that has got next to nothing to do with global desertification, which is a major contributor to climate change. And then even if you solve that, you have the major problem of mainstream agriculture that should be based on the biological sciences, but because of complexity in institutions and what are called wicked problems in institutions, they do not behave like a human. We have agriculture that's based on chemistry and marketing of technology. And that is the most extractive, destructive industry ever in the history of mankind, more destructive even than coal and oil. In terms of soil loss, damage, societies, communities, poverty, etc. So either we try to solve these problems piecemeal, one by one, or we need to recognize that they're all coming from a common source. And I think that's the contribution that our work brings to the table, in that all the people tackling aspects of these problems, we can make their work successful. Because if they don't address the root cause of global desertification, climate change, even national parks, in my part of Africa, where I live much of the time, are major contributors now to climate change, poverty, human habitat destruction, biodiversity loss. So either we try and deal with these bits and pieces, or we have a major paradigm change and recognize that they're all flowing from the same source, which is current and universal management that is reductionist in a holistic world. So we're recognizing increasingly that the worldview needs to change from a mechanistic worldview to a holistic worldview, and that's the contribution we bring to it, is how to actually do what is required. I read many books where I cannot find myself disagreeing with a single thing the author says right through the book. And it's what we need to do to restore our communities, our agriculture, etc., etc. And I find myself in agreement with every point because it's scientifically sound in every way that I know it is sound thinking. But when I put the book down at the end, I say, so what? Because there wasn't one word anywhere on how to do it. It was what we need to do. And many people, if you think about that, are talking about what we need to do, but don't really know how to do it.
So Allan, explain to the audience, in your words, what is holistic management, and how will that help us to reverse the desertification and mitigate the climate crisis?
Well, let me back off to that, just to fundamentals, just strip it down to first principles. The most fundamental thing that I think everybody viewing this can agree is that if you do not address the cause of the problem, you will not solve the problem. All right, so if we're going to come to holistic management, to understand its importance, we first need to understand what is causing global desertification, destabilization of the climate, mass immigration to Europe, national parks even contributing, as I said, to climate change. What is causing all this? Now, do we have hundreds of different things causing it? Or is there a possibility one thing could be causing it? Well, to cut to the chase, there is only one cause. So where people are blaming livestock or coal and oil, no, those are resources that will be needed for centuries to come, right? So what we've got to tackle is the management, the actual management that decides to burn fossil fuels at a rapid rate, causing damage to the world, or to run livestock, as we've done for thousands of years, causing desertification. So the coal or the oil or the livestock are not the cause of the problem. It is the management that manages them in a way that puts masses of carbon into the atmosphere, makes the rainfall less effective all over the world. That is what we need to address. So when we come down to that then and look at the management, we find that there are thousands of different ways you can manage. So if you go into Harvard or anywhere else and look at the libraries, bookshops and so on, you'll see endless books on management. There's so many ways of managing, dictatorially, scientifically, democratically, whatever you like. So if we've got thousands of ways of management, how does it help us to say management is the cause of the problem? You see, you're back with confusion at that point, because which management are you to change? Which is faulty? So what I did in the years of struggling to understand this problem and to find a way of solving it was I, in effect, came down to very basic first principles again and just looked at every way there was known in management and started peeling the onion. Because at the end of the day, in any management, you have to take an action. And if you keep peeling the onion in every management process in the world, you come to exactly the same core. And it is a genetically inherited core that all tool-using animals have, including humans. And there's the cause of it. And there are two flaws in that cause. So now, coming back to your question, what is holistic management? It is the holistic management framework and its slight adjustments, two main adjustments to the core framework that all humans use. And immediately we do that, management ceases to be reductionist or mechanistic in a holistic world, and it becomes holistic. And the same people can begin to solve the problems. It makes every organization that's trying to solve the problems more effective, etc. I actually love an ad that used to appear on television. I think it was BASF, a chemical company, and you used to see it on American television. And they said, we do not make the tennis balls you use. We make them bounce higher. We do not make the dresses you use. We make them brighter. We do not make the carpets you use. We make them last longer. And I love that because that's the way people need to look at holistic management framework. It makes all of our efforts successful. Whereas if we keep on doing what we are and we debate and discuss different practices, we will just be in what is called incremental change. It'll take another century or more. And I don't think the Greta Thunbergs and the young people of this world have got the luxury of time. I think we need to start looking at the root cause of the problem. That's what we've done. That's what holistic management does. So that, to try to round that off, I would just say, what is wrong in conventional mainstream management? The two glitches. The first, let me cover the least important of them, is that there is no tool in the scientist's toolbox, in society's toolbox, that can address global desertification. Now that I covered in a TED talk when I said there is no option but to introduce another tool, which is animals, large animals, mainly livestock, without which we cannot address that problem. So in our mainstream thinking, all right, we have to use a tool at the end of the day. You cannot even drink water today unless you go to a river and drink with your hands in your mouth without using technology. So we use technology to do anything. I cannot convert a tree into furniture without picking up an axe. I have to use some tool. No amount of creativity, no amount of thought, no amount of thinking holistically, no amount of money, no amount of labor can do anything with that tree until I pick up a tool. Right, so what tools do humans have to address climate change? We have technology, and that we can use, and we have got to use to find alternatives to fossil fuels as energy sources, right? We can solve that problem. Now, what other tools do we have? We've had technology for over 1 million years, starting with sticks and stones. We could sharpen the sticks, we could chip the stones, we could not change our environment. And then we got the tool of fire, and we could melt the stones, and technology took off on steroids, and we could explore space. We could use the computer we're using and everything we're using right now, right? So for 99.9% of human existence, we've had technology and fire. It is impossible to address climate change and global desertification with only technology and fire. And you could train in any university and any profession in the world, and you'll be trained to use technology and fire. Now, about 10,000 years ago, we've got to stretch it a bit to call it a tool, but we can, because it's a positive application. We developed the idea of conservation, resting the environment to let it recover, which is today embodied in conservation. All right, so now we have 3 tools. And of those 3 tools, 2 of them cause desertification. So you see why in our mainstream reductionist management policies, thinking of today, it is simply impossible to address global desertification and thus climate change ultimately. So we have no option there. Now, the other thing that, the other flaw in our framework is even with the most sophisticated interdisciplinary teams of scientists who are fully aware that, say, a policy will have social consequences, environmental consequences, economic consequences, when we put together that integrated scientific team and we get all the people with the appropriate expertise, because we know it'll have these consequences, watch what they do, and they will reduce the problem, be it drugs in America or noxious weeds invading or any problem of this sort. They will reduce the problem or the complexity to the problem. And that is why it is reductionist. So even though I don't know most of the people viewing me talking right now, but I know that in all of your lives, I can guarantee that you made every decision in your life, maybe a couple of them not so, but you made them to meet a need or a desire or to solve a problem. And you cannot reduce the complexity of our families, our humans, human behavior, our institutions, our organizations, our politics and everything, and climate change and so on. You cannot reduce the complexity of that problem to meeting a need, a desire, or solving a problem as the context or reason for an action. So what does the holistic framework bring to the table? It brings to the table the idea that in any management situation or developing a policy, you develop, the people involved develop one overarching, single, holistic context. And that embodies how the people want their lives to be based on their deepest spiritual, cultural values, how those lives will have to be sustained for generations, for hundreds of years by the environment. What condition will their environment have to be in for that to happen? And essentially, it ties how we want our lives to be to our life-supporting environment. Because ultimately, no organism can exist if its habitat is destroyed. And we are destroying human habitat, not just wildlife habitat, we're destroying human habitat. So it brings that concept of using a single holistic context where there's total agreement, no compromise. It unifies people. It gets rid of a lot of the conflict that is caused by the reductionist framework. And then it brings in an additional tool, livestock, to be used where essential, where nothing else can reverse man-made desertification. I don't know if we can ever, as you said at the beginning, reverse climate change. That creeps into our languaging. I only like to talk really about reversing man-made global desertification and addressing climate change. I think that's about the best. Well, I'm only comfortable with that. Yeah. I hope that helped answer some of your points.
That's great. Alan, can you talk a little bit about how holistic management and the holistic context is used in Zimbabwe with livestock to reverse desertification in Zimbabwe, specifically at your center there?
Well, the only difference there with the 50-odd holistic management locally led hubs there are around the world on 6 continents, they're all doing essentially the same thing, just managing holistically. The difference is in the Zimbabwe case was the first where not only are we working where the whole idea originated, but we are working without any fencing, division of land. We have millions of hectares of land unfenced, vast national parks, hunting areas, forests around us, communal lands around us with not a single fence. We are reversing the desertification with elephants and buffalo and giraffe and sable and kudu and bushbuck and duiker and impala and zebra and all the wildlife of Africa. And we're doing it by herding the livestock. And the results have been phenomenally encouraging. We're in our 16th year of poor rains. This year was the worst any of us can recall. And we literally, and I'm not exaggerating, we cannot keep pace with the production of the land now. Now that could be duplicated all around the world. And that is not being duplicated, to my knowledge, on most ranches using fencing, because it is so difficult with fencing to actually change the behavior of the animals. And the main tool, when we use the animal as a tool, the main thing is not the mouth of the animal, it's the feet.
Alan, can you show the audience some of the books that you have in your library that were influential?
Well, you and I were discussing them. Yeah, these are some that have influenced me greatly. I mean, the first, people often say I've got a theory, or they're critical of my theory. I don't have a theory. I've just used this, Holism and Evolution by Jan Smuts, written in 1926. It's very heavy reading, but I've read that 2 or 3 times. And really just worked on his theory. Many people don't know of smuts today. I believe I've read elsewhere that Einstein was very familiar with Smuts's work. They used to correspond. And apparently Einstein said there were two constructs that he believed in the world would have major impact on the world. One obviously was his own theory of relativity, and the second was Smuts's concept of holism and evolution. And I think we're going to shift in worldview to that concept, that the natural world that we are trying to manage and live in has no parts, no connections as a mechanistic concept. It is only made up of whole atoms, whole molecules, no matter what you go to level. All of the people listening to me are whole humans, but there's colonies of cells, and most of those cells are bacteria, but they're still part of you, and then whole blood cells, whole molecules, whole cells, whole organs, whole human. And if you're upset, you don't feel it in your mind, you feel it all through your body because you're a whole. And so it is throughout nature. So that's influenced me enormously. A lot of your work today is focusing on soils. And as I've been saying to you, we'd be arrogant if we thought we were the first. Albert Howard preceded us over 100 years ago, pointing out the tremendous importance of the soils. I value this book enormously. It was given to me when Sir Frank Fraser-Darling spent 6 weeks with me in Africa when I was a young biologist freshly out of university, and he's actually autographed it to me here, thanking me for a long Yolanda or safari, and this was his personal copy of Soil Conditions and Plant Growth by Sir John Russell. This is over 100 years old. All right, and we're talking today as though we're just discovering the importance of the soil. No, all these things have been going on long before us. And then, as you know, in trying to understand and solve the livestock problem, I used a lot of the thinking of Andre Bazin in grass productivity. And then so many people don't go back to the original work, and they plagiarize and mimic and copy. And I've seen that happening to Bazin a great deal. So my wife and I had this book republished in the United States so people could go back to the original work. So I value deeply some of these original books from which helped me a great deal to begin to get the principles right to reach the point which we have today.
Excellent, Allan. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm bringing myself back on the camera for a minute here. Just to also remind people, this is a Soil for Climate interview with Allan Savory, the inventor of holistic management and holistic plant grazing. And just a little bit of my own background. I got into this from the climate side. And so just so people sort of understand that Allan is now talking about a much bigger picture. It's not just about climate or desertification. It's really about holistic management in general as sort of a new paradigm for how, we live on this planet and with each other. We're in a new era now. And it even for me, it took a while to kind of, I want to say, no, it's about soil and climate and grazing. He's like, no, it's much bigger than that. So that's even our own little struggle, if you will. So, well, what is the narrative? What are we really talking about? From the soil for climate, well, it's in the name. We're talking about soil for climate, but Allan reminds me, but that's not good enough. The whole management of the conversation has to be within a holistic context. And I realize this is sort of difficult for people to hear. It was even for me, but do make the effort. And I've made my own sort of a holistic context for myself. It's just a private thing for myself that I've made, but I've done it. I've gone through the exercise, and I encourage people to do that. In terms of the science, in terms of just literally the physics and the biology, soil is an important reservoir for carbon. And if we are going to mitigate, if not reverse global warming, we are going to have to restore soil all over the world. The science supports it. The math is there. The drawdown numbers are there. There's great research. that's being done by Richard Teague and others, and you'll be seeing more of it in the next couple of years. The Soil for Climate files area on our Facebook group has tons of peer-reviewed, cited papers that discuss this. So yes, we will continue to advocate for that soil for climate from the pure sort of physics of sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. But the reality in terms of how humans are going to do it, you know, requires the holistic management part that Allan has been talking about. I just wanted to say something else too. So Allan, I want you to talk a little bit about your sort of discovery of the holistic framework and you know the pieces that led to that, and that Allan was telling me earlier that was in 1984 after years of trying to solve the problem of environmental degradation. And of course, 1984, well, people my generation, we grew up, you know, the book by George Orwell, 1984, right? This dystopian future. And then when when Apple released the Macintosh, their ad was, why 1984 won't be like 1984 because of the Macintosh. And it's interesting, the Macintosh now is really sort of a metaphor for communications and using technology to make a better world. And then that's also the same year that Allan came up with the holistic management. So it's sort of interesting. We kind of flipped the idea of 1984 being a bad thing into being a good thing. So anyway, tell us just a little bit about, you know, about your discovery in 1984, and then we want to take questions. So we do see the questions are coming in, and we will start answering them immediately after this part.
Yeah, I don't like that word discovery. I developed
Yes.
the holistic framework with the help of thousands of people that I've worked with over the years. None of us knew what we were really looking for. We didn't have the buzzwords, desertification and climate change, and none of us knew what we were looking for. I was just trying to solve the problem of inevitable mass environmental degradation wherever humans went, it seemed. And I thought we'd solved it in the late 60s and 70s with the planned grazing process that I developed, expanding on Wazan's work. And when I realized that we could not solve the problem with livestock alone, I mean wildlife alone, and we had to use livestock. And so I looked at all the different techniques of planning in the world, settled on the military one as the most experienced, centuries of experience of planning a very complicated situation. I thought I was dealing with complexity, but I wasn't. So we had over 100 places that were very successful on 5 countries in Africa by the late 1970s. And we thought we were there. Then I was forced into exile, came to the United States, and had to spend 4 years here before I could go home. When I could get home, I found that every single one of those projects had reverted back, failed, etc. So something was still missing. And when I analyzed all of the cases as I did, I found it wasn't the planning process that had caused the problem, it was me. I had not understood complexity, and I hadn't solved the problem of how to deal with complexity. I had omitted the cultural, the social, the economic aspects in the training I was doing with people. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. Fortunately, at that time, the American government had engaged me, was paying me very handsomely to put 2,000 people through training over a 2-year period from the World Bank, USAID, American universities, the main government agencies. All of those people helped me a great deal in developing. But the idea of a holistic framework, none of us had. And that came about by accident, and as so often things do. There was a knock on my door. I was living in San Angelo at the time, and it was Professor Steger from Angelo State University. I was surprised to see him because universities were so antagonistic to my work and were saying it was anathema to them. And so I invited him to come in, have a drink, find out what it was about. And he said, look, I've come to talk to you because he said, we don't understand what you're doing. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, 3 times you've visited our research station. We've shown you the work we're doing, and you just look at it and look at us, and you predict the result. You don't ask for the data. You don't ask for any of the data we've gathered. You just tell us the result and you leave. And he said, each time we have ridiculed you, because what sort of scientist doesn't even look for the data? He just tells you what the result's going to be of experiments. And he said, but every time, exactly what you're saying happens. He said, what the hell are you doing? And I said, well, let me try to explain to you. And as I tried to explain to him, I could see the confused look on his face. So I grabbed a bit of paper and a pencil, and I began to draw blocks representing ecosystem processes, water cycle, mineral cycle, the four processes I'd never ever seen in one place. Leopold had two of them, other people had three, and so on. And I put all four down there. And then I said, these are really one process, like looking in four windows. Then I put the tools that humans have, and I started drawing lines and talking about the influence at different types of environments around the world. And I said, when I look at your research, all I'm looking at is the land, what sort of environment you're in, how do plants decay in that environment, and you tell me what research you're doing, but you're telling me what tools you're applying to that land. I know what the tendency will be in that environment, so I just can predict what the outcome will be. And as I drew these lines and everything else, I still didn't get it over to him. And I think he left as confused as when he came. Thankfully, Jodie was in the room watching. And when he left, she said, you need to capture that. Nobody understands how your mind is unraveling these situations. And so I used that bit of paper, and it was our first very primitive framework. So now I had it on paper, and I used it in the teaching that I was doing of thousands of people, as I say, and scientists. And with each group, what they didn't understand could be quickly clarified, corrected. So the framework developed rapidly after that. And by 1984, we had the final piece in place, the holistic concept idea. That concept was so new, we didn't know what we were looking for. It wasn't in any religion, any branch of science, any philosophy in the world. How could you have one overarching context or reason for all management in any situation? So when that piece fell into place, that was 1984. That's why I say finally we reached the point where we can predict the results if you practice, if you follow the processes. And then in some of the groups that I was training with, we began to, and that's when the word holistic came into the name of the grazing and the framework. And then with some of the groups, what we began to do is to, in the training, spend 1 hour every day trying everything we could to find flaws in the logic or the science. And in the early days, we found a few flaws that helped us correct things. And then towards the end, we just couldn't find any. And then right at the end of that training, I was breaking groups into 8 to 10 people, whatever, small groups, and then just saying to them, well, let's treat this as a hypothesis. It's not. It's management of complexity, but let's treat it as a hypothesis. Do you fully understand what the process is? Everybody did by then. And I said, no, you've got unlimited time. Theoretically, cause it to fail. Because if we can theoretically cause this to fail, it is going to fail in practice. So we'll know something is missing still. And we could not get people to even theoretically cause it to fail. So I see 84 as about the pivotal year. From there on, we have known how to deal with complexity. Now we can refine the process, develop better and better, but basically we knew how to fly, if I could put it that way.
Right.
84.
And Allan, continue for the audience the conversation that you and I had earlier about how global warming is now the unifying narrative around the world in which holistic management will be most effective.
Well, I see it as the last piece that needed. When I wrote with Jodie and Sam Bingham, who worked with me, the first edition of the book Holistic Management, if you read the conclusion of that, and I think we included it in the second and so on, I said that if we'd been concerned in the Roman times, or whenever, when Herodotus was deeply concerned with the breakdown of the granary of the Roman Empire, which was the North African coast, and he started describing the heavy black soils that were eroding away and droughts and floods were increasing, etc. If we'd been very concerned then, there's nothing we could have done about it because we didn't know Australia existed. We didn't know the Americas existed. We didn't know humans had already got there. We didn't know that they had already destroyed 80% of the genera of animals and replaced their role with fire. So we couldn't have done anything about it. Now, when we tail end of the last millennium, the pieces finally fell into place. We finally had know how to address complexity. We knew about the existence of the whole world. Now, prior to that, we didn't have the technology. Because, for instance, we wouldn't have known about carbon in the atmosphere. We didn't have the technology to measure it. We wouldn't have known about ozone holes in the atmosphere. We didn't have the technology to measure it. So tail end of the last millennium, we finally had the knowledge how to correct it. We knew the whole globe was affected. We had the technology to know these things, but we were still missing some things. And one of those was the ability to communicate right around the world as team humanity. We got that with the internet, for good and for bad, but we can now communicate rapidly, whereas in all my early years, it was letters and telexes and things. Now we can communicate rapidly. So we had another ingredient to solving this on a global scale. We were still lacking one thing. If you studied us historically, we have only united in times of war. So we'll unite in times of war to fight a common enemy, but the moment the war is over, we're back to fighting each other. So that's how human nature has been. And so I kept thinking there's going to be something essential to unite humans, to get us beyond this mentality of fighting each other all the time. So I expressed it as the last war that will ever be fought, the greatest and last war that will ever be fought. The war to learn to live with ourselves and our environment in harmony. To live with ourselves and our environment in harmony. But we needed something to unite us in that war. And the only thing I could see emerging was climate change. And I think that's beginning to happen with the movement of the youth of today, the Greta Thunbergs, and the millions of other young people that are so deeply concerned. They're beginning to unite us as team humanity to get on and solve this problem.
Allan, I want to thank you so much for that. I just want to get back in here for a second. It really is an honor to be working with you in any capacity as part of Team Humanity, to be addressing the problem of climate change and global warming. And I agree with Allan, it is the uniting narrative issue in the world today that we're all facing. And we came at this initially, from the soil climate side, but Allan is reminding us there's a bigger narrative here about a holistic management. We're entering a new era, and you could think of someone like Greta Thunberg as really the beginning of the holistic generation, or the generation for which the whole planet has to begin to work in a new framework. And so again, she's coming to it from the climate side, as I was and as we were, because that is the global story, if you will. But how is that going to be managed? And that's where the holistic management comes from. So, we're all learning. I'm learning right now during this talk, I'm learning. So let's start to take questions now. And the rest of this interview will be taking questions from our comment. So Jody, why don't you just shout out? You can just shout it out, whatever it is.
Okay. This one is just, I'm talking to someone currently who accepts climate science, but believes we are already too far down the path, so that he argues it's futile to try to slow it down or stop it. I don't believe that it's futile, but I recognize that we need to work fast. How fast can we implement holistic management to achieve measurable results?
It's never too late, never hopeless, never ever give up, never ever ever give up. And that I believe in. Now, if we're going to deal with this in a timely manner for the young people of the world, to give them a hope, then I believe the way to do it is to address it at the root cause. If we address it as a compilation of many, many problems, as we talked of earlier, we can guarantee another half century to a century of debate, discussion, argument over different agricultural practices, different forms of energy, all the things that humans argue and fight about. If we address it at the root cause, which is the reductionist management, reductionist development of policies, then I think no scientist in the world can argue that. And I think that gives humans, young people, a fighting chance that we can begin very rapidly to drastically change the situation. When I say no scientist can argue that, I don't believe any scientist can argue in favor of continuing with reductionist management. It just doesn't make sense to continue with reductionist management when we have the option of managing holistically in a worldview that is changing. So if we can agree on that, then everything can change rapidly, because you're beginning to address all of the problems simultaneously, virtually. If we do it piece by piece, I think it's going to be too late.
I just keep feeling.
Yep. Okay. What would a holistic economy or a holistic system of government look like?
There isn't such a thing.
Okay.
What would it look like?
It wouldn't.
Okay,
Okay.
expound.
I'm having fun with you.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, we're misusing the word holistic. Okay, the first government to manage holistically, to develop policies holistically, would almost be in power for all time, because people are desperate for good governance. The main reason that governments change and keep changing is because their policies are unsound. And there is no government in the world at the moment that can make policies sound, because every government in the world develops policy in the same way. They bring in teams of scientists, teams of experts, lobbyists, etc., pressure groups, all of these brought together. They reduce the problem, whatever the problem is, terrorism, drugs, noxious weeds, desertification, climate. They reduce that social web of complexity, economic web of complexity, to the problem with these teams, and the unintended consequences are so normal that economists actually refer to the law of unintended consequences. And you get a new government in, people clap and applaud, give it 6 months, and we want to throw them out and bring in another government. I didn't realize the full significance of policies and why they make it so difficult for any government to stay in power ever, because they're unsound. I did not realize that till I was personally president of a political party, facing general election, etc. And at that point, I realized, oh my God, this is what governments do, develop policies. And I haven't any idea how to do it. Neither does anybody in the world. And I often quote Mugabe, much maligned Mugabe, when he was Prime Minister of Zimbabwe and trying desperately to do the right things when our long civil war ended. He made a speech that I think was extremely wise. He said, we do not have a bigger problem than our rising population and our deteriorating environment. And he said, we politicians don't know what to do. That is so true. There isn't a politician in the world that knows what to do. He said, all we can do is take the advice of our experts, but when it goes wrong, we get the blame. And that is true of every politician in the world.
So what's step one?
Step one is to get the public to insist that their governments develop policies holistically. The moment the public insists on that, governments can change, will change, and you will see a very different world.
Have you ever seen evidence of that? Has there ever been a group that has tried to engage with elected officials around holistic?
There have been many who have tried to engage. Earlier, we were talking about the American government engaging me over 2 years to put 2,000 people through training. These were professors and scientists of various levels and various fields and everything. Now, those people in training brought hundreds of their own policies to the training. Using the holistic framework, they analyzed their own policies, not me doing it, them. They concluded every single policy was unsound, without exception, and would lead to unintended consequences. One group in training, and you can read the sentence in the first textbook I published, said, we now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States. Frankly, it's the same for every government. Now, if your government is universally having unsound policies dealing with complexity, do you see why no government can stay in power? Because the public gets dissatisfied with those policies. So you look at anyone here, I mean, like, just take drug policy. America used, I'm sure, the best experts they could to develop a drug policy. What is the result? Drug use increased and violence spread across borders and even spread to Africa, and it's still spreading. Didn't stop drug use. What's the policy on noxious weeds developed by thousands of good scientists? And what's the effect? Noxious weeds have increased. We spend over $1 billion every year, have done the 40 years I've been here. We've never killed a single weed species in a single state. We've poisoned the water, poisoned the environment, increased cancer and all sorts of diseases, wasted $1 billion every year, and we just keep doing it. It doesn't matter what policy you pick. So the change will be rapid when the public insists that policies change. Because when we did all that training with all those government people, what was the institutional response? The planning was that if there was a big demand and if the bulk of them liked it, we would develop an American training center. That was the agreement I had with government. That was the planning. The result was, when all those people found that policies were unsound, etc., the result was all future training was banned, and it set us back 30 years. We still, none of us understood that institutions are complex, and institutions do not behave like a human being behaves, and institutions cannot change until the public insists.
Allan, just a quick interjection here. Myself and other colleagues are working on what's called healthy soils legislation. And there's sort of a healthy soils legislation movement that's happening at the state level. And I'm going to make an effort to have holistic planning and insistence on holistic management be part of that effort itself. So that's something we can continue afterwards.
Yeah, that's admirable. And but if you just got the government to develop policies holistically, then that would happen and last.
Okay, well, we'll follow up on that. Jody, I wonder if you want to say the person's name who's asking.
Okay, so sorry, I didn't do that. Carl Rosenberg is asking something right in line with this. How can we convince our local governments to holistically graze and not burn natural areas in non-brittle environments?
Well, again, he's talking about how can we convince an institution, our local government. You cannot convince an institution. There is not a single case I can find throughout history where any institution has changed ahead of public opinion. When new scientific insights are involved, or managerial insights, as in this case, if there are paradigm shifting new insights, institutions, it's a wicked problem of institutions, cannot change. That's why not even a single cattlemen's organization has yet supported me. That's why not a single environmental organization has yet supported me.
Well, we support you when we're an organization.
Yeah, you're a very small one.
Well,
who started with this.
All right.
Okay, but I've even had organizations that I formed throw me out of it, because that's how organizations behave. It's natural.
Okay, can we go into the next one?
Yeah, you wanted to do rapid fire questions.
Okay, one more. And from Dylan Wicks in Australia. With the drought becoming such a widespread issue in this country and the oddly rising prices of rural property, what would your advice be for people starting from ground zero who want to become like you, doing the work you do?
Well, it would be to get involved. Fortunately, there's an Australian hub, and there are hundreds of people in Australia already doing good work. Just get involved with them. And if you take it from your individual family point of view, just develop a holistic context. How do you want your life to be? You and your family, how do you want your lives to be? Tie that to your life supporting environment, and then start to make your decisions that way. And if you're short of capital and so on, you might begin by leasing land or whatever it is. Or if you're just a city person, you'll begin to change your life towards a holistic context for yourself. And as a more informed citizen, when you get policy to change, then it will change for all ranchers and farmers and people all over Australia.
Okay, question from Caleb Williams. Can you describe the change, or why the change from the holistic goal to the holistic context?
Yeah, because that was one of my mistakes. I've made many mistakes and I've learned a lot from them. And that was one. I called it, I said earlier, we had a totally new concept, not in any branch of science, religion, or philosophy. So I had to give it a name. It was the reason or context for all decisions in a government or a company or a farm family or whatever. And so I called it a holistic goal, one word, not two words. Holistic wasn't an adjective, right? Now, what happened was people heard the word goal and they treated it as a goal to be achieved. No, the holistic context is not a goal to be achieved. It is a context or reason for all your decisions as you meet needs and desires and solve problems. So that wasn't working. And even people who had trained a lot with me, I was seeing major blunders because they were calling it a goal in their minds, even if not in words. And so we went to holistic context to correct that. And that has helped a lot of people. And unfortunately, Jody tells me I can't invent words. Shakespeare could, but apparently a biologist can't, because I would have called it a whole text.
Okay. All right. Next question from Michael Riley. If this is a mostly agricultural problem, how do people change their farming practices in a place like here in New Zealand, where farmers are pretty sure they're doing a great job?
Well, first, it's not mostly an agricultural problem. This is a problem affecting national parks, affecting the oceans, affecting everything. It's all facets of human life. We're dealing with symptoms of reductionist management. Now, coming to the New Zealand agricultural problem, it's New Zealand's problem is like everybody else's. The individuals can change. The individuals, there are already New Zealanders who've been working with us and training with us for years. They can change, begin to improve things on their own farms, their own lives. But in every country, it's the same issue. While people are trying to change at the farm level or the practitioner level, you've got government policies from above forcing, in many cases, wrongful practices. We see this in America, England. I saw a lot of this in Europe recently, where European Union policies are incredibly destructive, and where I would ask farmers, why are you doing this? When everybody knows it's wrong, and they would just say it's because of policies. So this is very common, and New Zealand is riddled with that. So I can only say to you, begin to change on your own farm where you can, and then begin to talk to other people till enough people in New Zealand are saying our government needs to develop policy holistically. And when you do, you will see phenomenal change and improvement throughout New Zealand, not just in agriculture.
Question from Ed Bourgeois. What do we do in a world dominated by reductionist scientists? How do you talk with them?
You talk with them like any human beings, because thousands of these reductionist scientists, of which I was one, have helped me to develop holistic management. I've stood on the shoulders of many people, including people who failed in what they were doing. That failure taught me what didn't work, because I was just seeking something that would work. So just treat them as humans. The difficulty is the institutions. Where, for example, we talked of wicked problems earlier. You can put the most perfect people into an institution, but it does not behave like those people. So you can ask almost anybody in the United States, does it make sense for America to produce oil, to grow corn, to produce fuel for vehicles? And almost anybody will tell you that's stupid. Well, there are thousands of highly intelligent, good reductionist scientists paid by institutions who are doing that. And so just, you can only treat people as individuals. And when enough individuals want to change, institutions will. I don't know what more to say. I'm grappling with the same problem.
Okay, next question from Sarah Keel. What animals, wild and domesticated, can we utilize to restore habitats in the U.S.? Cows, yes, but what else? Chickens, pigs,
Yeah,
etc.
any animal. So you can use, there are some good articles and so on coming out, and I saw something on the BBC just now, a while back, on goats producing grassland on rocky hills where it hadn't been, on goats reducing the fire load in California. Nearly all of that's been traced back to the training I was doing in the 80s, when something like 15,000 people came through my hands learning to use animals as a tool. As I said earlier, we have no option but to use animals as a tool. And that means wildlife, domestic stock, all of these animals. Now, for most purposes, the most easy and readily available is livestock: cattle, sheep, goats, llamas, camels, pigs, chickens, pigeons, whatever. But use animals.
Okay, this may be the last one from, let's see, it's from Tori Antonino. What do we tell our friends who say going vegan is needed to fix climate change?
Well, I wrote a blog on this, which you can easily get. It will help you if you want to get it. Seth can give it to you. Where the vegans are very sincere, and what I like about them is they're prepared to fight for what they believe, and that's very much how I've been. So I have a lot of respect for them on one hand. But in that blog, I wrote that if you want to be vegan, and this is how you could talk to your friends, if you want to be vegan, please do so. It's your right if you believe it for spiritual or health reasons, if you believe it yourself. That is your right. But if you are doing it for the environment or for ethical reasons, then you're doing damage. That is a reductionist management, and the unintended consequence is you'll do great damage. It's unethical, and it does nothing but damage for the environment, the vilifying of livestock and meat, etc. If you're going to vilify meat, don't vilify the meat, vilify the management.
Do you have another question?
No.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone. This is Seth again, joining Allan. Allan, thank you so much for answering those questions.
Can I go now?
No, not yet. And I just want to be clear to the audience that Soil for Climate is a nonprofit organization, and we do stand with Allan Savory and the Savory Institute and holistic management, and we do recognize that livestock are an essential tool or resource, whatever you want to call it, when managed properly for restoring soil. And restoring soil literally means to increase the soil carbon, and that carbon is only coming from one place, it's coming from the atmosphere. And I have personally seen the benefits of this myself. If you go to the banner graphic on top of the Soil for Climate Facebook group, you'll see the banner images itself, two photographs next to each other. They're both of the exact same spot. It's in Zimbabwe, what they call the two tree site, because there's sort of two trees next to each other. One picture was taken in 2004, the other was taken in 2014. It takes about 10 years to see really a profound, comprehensive change in a landscape. And you see it there, and they did that by increasing the livestock density 5-fold. Not only did they not cut back on livestock, they have 5 times the amount that they had before, and of course they're running properly.
And now we have elephants we never had before,
Oh,
and buffalo we never had before.
Right.
And by the way, it doesn't take 14 years. We can get.
It was 10 years
we
in
can
that
get
example.
dramatic change in a year.
In a year, okay. Well, there you go. You heard it from the expert. To hell with a decade. You can do it in a year. So, yes. So a couple of points. I'll just also from my side that these narratives come up. People talk about rewilding, and Allan will tell you he actually is one of the people that invented that concept decades and decades ago, and he realizes that it was a mistake. because it's still this idea of sort of pushing against livestock. But the wild grazers, including the elephants and the water buffalo and the impala on the land in Zimbabwe, where their center is far greater now than it was before they started, without any rewilding plan. They just managed the livestock properly. The grasses came back, the perennial grasses came back, the water table got replenished, there was more surface water. So the wildlife naturally happened anyway. And the state park, the national state park in Zimbabwe, in Victoria Falls, is literally like 5 or 10 kilometers away from their center. And in a single day, which I've done, you can drive to the official park and it's just like a desert, and there's no animals there at all. Of course, there's no grazing, there's no hunting allowed. And then you go to the Allan's Center, the Africa Center for Holistic Management, where there's tons of grazing done properly, and you've got grass and you've got water and you've got much more wildlife and you've got elephants and everything else. So rewilding will happen naturally when we restore the landscape with the proper grazing methodology that Allan advocates for. And in terms of the actual science, in terms of how much carbon can you get in an acre of soil to 15 inches, and there are great scientists who are working on that. And in 2020, there will be a bunch of new papers coming out, and you can find that information, that particular slice of this narrative, if you will, the part where soil is a reservoir for carbon and increasing it through better land management. Our group will continue to focus on that. It looks like we have another question. Yeah.
No, it's just people have been asking, is this recorded? They want to share it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so the beauty of Facebook, it's automatically being recorded. That's just how these Facebook things work. So as soon as this is done, it will be there. You can replay it and share it however you want. I just wanted to say something else. Soil for Climate also is an organization. We have a partner organization in Kenya called the Maasai Center for Regenerative Pastoralism, and we will be launching a project in December. So in a month and a half, I'm going to be in Kenya with my colleague Dalmas and Patty, and we will be launching a project there doing ecological restoration using the practices of holistic management, holistic plant grazing. There is a Savory Institute hub in Kenya, and we've been there to get training, and we will be implementing those. So I'm very excited about that. And it's real. It's not theoretical. Like there are streams in that village in Kenya which are going to run again, and they're going to run again because we've done proper grazing management. Okay, Allan, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there, please, any last words you want to share with our loving audience out there?
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Okay, all right.
No, thank you for listening. And thank you for the questions.
Jody, was there any other last question? Or?
No.
Okay, all right, everyone. Thank you so much. Please, if you would, share the Soil for Climate message, but also the holistic management message, and Allan's work of regenerative grazing and proper management of
Not my work, it's thousands of people.
Thousands of people's work. Okay, so we're in a new era, and I just want to say, we stand with Greta Thunberg and Bill McKibben and the climate movement and this new generation. We absolutely stand with them. The climate problem is a crisis. It's real. We have to stop doing burning of fossil fuels, but we also have to draw carbon out of the air. Most of that carbon is going to go into soils. Most of it is going to get there on grasslands and rangelands through the use of livestock managed properly, and the holistic planning, the holistic framework is going to be an essential part of creating the context for all these different groups
That,
to
by
manage.
the way, is why the Savory Institute has the strategy of concentrating on the world's grasslands, because that's where there will be the highest possible return to any investment in trying to take the sequestration of carbon seriously. To be the grasslands, not in the planting of trees.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, there you heard it. So the focus is on grasslands and using a holistic context and a holistic management. to try and implement these things that work best for everyone. Okay, so we're all done. All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.